Hi, Hani. Thank you very much for doing this interview.
It's great to do it with you.
It's really nice to be with you. And I would like to ask you some questions just to understand better your upbringing and the things that you're facing and the challenges that, you're dealing with. So maybe the first question would be, can you look back and the way you were raised and what there that help you to become the person you are and have the career you have?
So thank you, Naomi. It's nice to talk with you this morning. And I grew up in Borough Park, in a very kind of traditional Borough Park, Heimish, largely survivor family. And in that community, there were a lot of values of hard work. This belief that hard work can accomplish anything. The worst thing any of my parents could say to us would be like, leidige Hand, idle hands that weren't busy doing something. And I think there was just an example, particularly by our grandparents who had gone through so much, of just first core resilience, that anything that life gives you with your community, with your faith, you can overcome it. And a sense of achrayus, of responsibility to your community, to your family, and to yourself to accomplish whatever mission HaKadosh Baruch Hu set out for you. So that was very much the kind of community. It was not common for women to get, formal educations and work. Many women had little stores on 16th Avenue or 13th Avenue. My grandmother had a hardware store that I always worked in, Erev Pesach. But it wasn't common at all for women to get an education and do a professional job. But that was very much the background I grew up in.
So what made you do this shift and actually go get a proper education and have the ability to express the achrayus you were, raised by? So what was the shifting point?
So it's a good question, because I think rather than a shifting point, life is sometimes a journey, right? And a series of steps. So for me, coming out of Beis Yaakov of Borough Park, really the only choice was Turo, which was a frum night school. I didn't go to any, real formal education in that way until after I was married. But Turo was a path for, observant women and men to go to school at night and gain a set of skills. For me, I've always loved computers, so I'd started programming while I was still in high school. I just loved to make things work. And at that time, there was a big shift happening in technology where computers were shifting from these large mainframes to more at every desktop. And I loved making things better, making things operate more quickly or fixing mistakes that until then a person had to catch. So I started working at a financial services company and going to Turo at night. And I met my husband and we moved to Boston. He was a student, he was in law school. And really living in Boston was that first opportunity to live outside Borough Park and to see a smaller community where every person really mattered. We became very involved in the Bikur Chaylim because many people came to the hospitals there. My husband was very involved in the shul. So seeing that role where sometimes in larger communities, there's less of an opportunity for each person to contribute and make a difference, we then were able to bring that back. And my husband really encouraged me. He knew how much I'd always dreamed of going to a real college and having a real education. So he really encouraged me to go to graduate school, and I did. And really then each step along the journey came after the other in terms of opportunities and the messages one had growing up of working hard and taking on challenges, not being afraid of them. Kind of, we know, right, based on our family histories, there isn't the freedom to be afraid of a challenge. You kind of have to just a bit face them head on and go from there.
The late Ruth Ginsburg, the judge, said that the Jewish values that she was raised by were her core values that led her work. In what way you feel like your Jewish upbringing, your Heimish, or in what way you feel like your Jewish upbringing is kind of affecting and influencing your job?
I think probably in three ways. One with regard to an understanding or a belief that each person is given a tafkid, a mission, and that our lives in many ways is discovering that mission. Some people know it as children. They always dream of being a doctor, or they always dream of being an artist. For others, the part of life is finding that mission and then trying to make a difference in that way, right? The belief that it's not enough to surmeira, it's not enough to avoid bad, but one must asay tov. You have to accomplish something in your life as well. And I think the second piece very much is the sense of achrayus, or responsibility, that, the Torah repeats again and again. If you see something happening, open your eyes and look. If an individual in the times of the Gemara, if a body was found outside the city, the leaders of the city had to say, Yadeinu lo shafcha, right? Our hands didn't, they were saying we were not responsible, because essentially they had to take responsibility for it, right? And I think finally, that sense of a past and a future, that, as a community, we very much believe we have a shared past, right? And we look at the lessons of that past. Some of the lessons are very difficult if you look at Jewish history, but also giving a sense of a future. The story of when we do the Pesach Seder every year, a big part of it is so that the children should ask, right? So we can tell our story to our children as part of passing on that story, as part of teaching them to have a commitment to those values and a sense that they're not a standalone person, but they have generations that came before them that are there to support them, whose strength is in their blood, and they have generations that will follow them, that will look to them as an example for what they did with the gift of their lives. So I think very much, those would be the messages. I also think, for me, my journey, and this may be something that's different in America than for a Haredi individual in Israel, is ensuring that you lead an integrated life, as both a Jew and as an American, to know that one doesn't have one life and one set of values and then one life, but in a separate way, but to work to be an integrated person and to be the same person even in different environments that you may find yourself in.
Oh, thank you. You have such a demanding job. And what are the challenges you're facing, or do you feel like you have to compromise on things? And how do you navigate?
It's a really good question, and I'm sure it's a question that many people think about. And I'll note that the role of women in the workplace is often the same for women all around the world, right? When I've traveled, there's always a special conversation any working woman can have, no matter what her background, what her faith. We all have the, how do you balance? How do you juggle? Oh, I dropped 6 balls today. I dropped 3 yesterday. And I think I would say first, there aren't compromises. It's thinking through the challenges. And a wise woman made a comment to me once that has stayed with me because I thought it was so thoughtful. And she said, in each of your most important relationships, your spouse, your children, your work, always make sure that your deposits exceed your withdrawals. And her point was that, if you've had a really busy week at work, make sure that that Shabbos, that weekend, you take your kids for a walk, or you try to ensure that you go to your husband and say, oh, so how about we go out on a date one night this week, right? To ensure that you always know that your relationships overall, you're not asking more than you really are contributing to it, because everything is the give and take. I think the second piece, particularly for women, is the intentionality. When I would be running home sometimes, Erev Shabbos on an early Shabbos late, and I would complain, my father would say, Hanala, you knew what time Shabbos was Sunday morning. No. Why weren't you ready? And the message is an important one. And I think, one of my favorite just sometimes to think about is really the story very, very much of Miriam by Yetzias Mitzrayim. And, at Yetzias Mitzrayim, she takes out a tambourine and she starts dancing with the women. And I've never seen a medrash ask this, but I've always wondered, where did the tambourine come from, right? They left Egypt so quickly that there wasn't time to even bring food, right? That's the story of matzah. So where'd she have a tambourine? And I think 2 thoughts. I think one is that thinking longer term to say, okay, I have a demanding job. I have a family that needs me. Let me try to be mesudar, to think through what I can get done now, what I can put in place, so that when that challenge comes, things are a bit more ready. But also sometimes to have just the faith that everything will work out okay. And when it is, take a few moments, tanz a bissel.
Beautiful. What kind of an advice would you give a young woman who want to make it in the world and want to get to a position that she has the achrayus to make the difference? What would you tell her?
I think, Friday night when we sing Eshes Chayil, there's words in there that I often reflect on, and it's V'tischak b'yom ha'acharon, right? She laughs on her last day. And I always think, what kind of person, not just a woman, but what kind of person can laugh on their last day? And it's somebody who feels, I contributed, I built, I'm leaving things better than I found them, right? So I think sometimes it can be hard to have a dream. As a woman growing up in the community, you're told that you can't do, and this you can't do, and the third thing has challenges. And I think to believe that truly, Kadosh Baruch Hu created each person with a tafkid. It's your tafkid to find it and to do it, and it's on you. That doesn't mean it won't come with challenges. But those challenges are opportunities to take them on and sometimes put one foot in front of the other. And just start to take that journey, and things will find their way. If you try to do something good, the help comes with it.
Can you share with us a challenge you had and somehow affected you and the way you navigated?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So it early on when I came into the Department of Defense, I didn't know anything about military culture. And it was difficult for me because, in New York, it's a very diverse society. I knew about my Italian Catholic neighbors. They knew about, Jewish Yom Tovim. They knew about holidays. They knew about kosher. It's a lot easier to just be whoever you are in New York, which is very diverse. And when I came and I started working in the military, I got asked questions that I'd never been asked before. Why do you do this? Why is it important to you to do this? In 2007, aren't these traditions from thousands of years ago? Why are they meaningful? And I'd never gotten those kind of questions before growing up in a Beis Yaakov environment, certainly living in New York. And in the beginning, I had to think hard about why I was doing things that, beyond growing up in a frum family and pursuing them, why they were important to me to do. And I found that in some ways, it enabled me to think about it and then acquire it for myself.
Own it.
Own it in that way. And I remember a funny story. So one of the generals who would often ask me very probing, difficult questions, and I would try to be very respectful, but sometimes they were difficult questions for me. And one day we were walking to a meeting in the Pentagon, and the Pentagon is very big. So if you're going to a meeting sometimes and you're late, you have to allow a good 10 minutes. And he wanted to take a shortcut through the middle courtyard because it was much faster. And we walk out, and it looked like it was going to rain. So I had an umbrella, and we're about 3 steps there, and it starts pouring. So I open the umbrella, and I look at him and I say, "Why don't you join me?" And he said, "No, in the Army we don't carry an umbrella." Because I think they want to demonstrate that whatever the weather, the Army moves forward. So I looked at him and I said, "Oh, why does that make any sense, right? I'm holding an umbrella. Why should you get wet?" He says, "And that's the way it is." I said, "Really? So sometimes you do things just for tradition?"
Whoa.
And he looked at me, we looked at each other, and we both started to laugh because we realized that there is sometimes we want a logical understanding. And sometimes we say there's value in tradition, things that have been done for many, many years, and continuing a chain. And I remember that moment when we looked at each other and laughed and realized that there are really shared values in many cultures that have a focus on a team and a focus on discipline and a focus on achieving something, because you try to learn from the past and then, as we say, pay it forward for those who follow.
So how you actually developed, professionally. So was there a pattern? Just if you share with us a little bit the way, it evolved.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So it wasn't something like I had a grand plan and a grand map to where I wanted my career to go. And I think many of us as women, often we have our own insecurities to manage within our own minds and our own hearts. So I think for me, it was first trying to do my best at every job I was in. And second, when I think about like my last pretty much 7 jobs, I was the first person in many cases to do those jobs because they were challenges that needed to be handled. So they weren't necessarily the most glamorous jobs, or they were jobs that were important, but they were really based on, a leader of an organization saying, I'd like us to do something better, and I need somebody who can bring people together to do that. So I think in some ways what we talked about earlier, which is not being afraid of challenges and having the resilience to say, I don't need to solve it myself. I need to have a team to bring together. And we say lo abayishan lo maid, to be confident enough to ask questions, to hear the answers, to sometimes take a step, realize, that wasn't necessarily the right one. Let's step back and reevaluate. And really, so to the question you're really asking, which is, what do you tell women who are starting, who may feel insecure, who may feel, I don't know where I want to go, is first, take on the most challenging opportunity you see. Second, really work your hardest. And third, have 2 or 3 people who you trust, who you can sit down with and say, I'm facing this challenge, I'm unsure of myself. What's the best way to pursue this? And then really feeling confident enough when you don't know to ask questions, because everybody around you, there's something they don't know. And sometimes when the person who's leading the organization is confident to say, I don't know the answer to that. Does anybody here know? If not, let's pull that together. It encourages everyone to be comfortable with that. So I think that bottom line, I did not have a grand plan and a grand map. It was putting sometimes one foot in front of the other and learning to have the confidence enough in myself and in the people around me to take on challenges and do your best.